To talk us through the possible impact or the impact on Brexit for Australia is David McCredie, Chief Executive Officer of the British Chamber of Commerce here in Australia. And David, welcome first off. But
Thanks, Tim.
This is the start of a huge process.
It is. It's somewhat the end of the beginning, if you like, and now we're at the beginning of the end, hopefully. Yes. So it's going to take a little while. Clearly, the withdrawal agreement that was so much of a problem for Theresa May that Boris Johnson clearly got passed during January, and the EU ratified that middle of the week, and now we're here. It's Brexit Day. And only a couple of hours to go, and the UK will be out. Well,
we've seen the flags go down in Brussels, but widely, it's going to be a huge exercise, isn't it? There's a lot to turn around. I know that the currency didn't change, but plenty did.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. So when we actually strike 11 o'clock in London, it won't be struck with Big Ben, unfortunately. They didn't quite get the funds up to make that work. But at that point in time, actually nothing much changes. In terms of for the business community, there's a transition period between now and the end of this year. That period, nothing changes. So the UK will still be part of the European Union in terms of part of the customs union. It'll still have the single market access that it currently enjoys. But the thing that's most important in that conversation about what it does mean for Australia is we're now able to start negotiating a free trade agreement. And it's been great to see Simon Birmingham out, particularly in the last few days, the Prime Minister as well, and others, really clearly saying this is a great opportunity for Australia to do some amazing work with the UK to really take free trade, not just bilaterally between ourselves, but how we can set a new standard for free trade agreements around the world, because we think we can do something really ambitious, really comprehensive between our two countries. Australia is ready to go. Our mandate has been given approval. UK haven't quite got there yet. They needed to get through this little hurdle. We expect that mandate to go forward from them in the next few weeks, and then we'll start negotiations and look to try and wrap it up, hopefully by the end of the year, but hopefully shortly thereafter, if not.
What are you forecasting in that space? Do you feel as if both hands have been tied for a number of years?
Look, the challenge has always been with the EU that there's 27 other countries as part of that conversation, and whilst it's very open and free within that group of countries, the problem is for countries outside of that, there is quite a big fence around it. So, French beef going to the UK, there's no tariff. For Australian beef going to Europe, there's a tariff. And we're only allowed, there's a tariff rate quota, so there's only a certain amount that we're allowed to export. So there's a genuine barrier to the amount we're able to export to Europe. We have the opportunity to change that. I'm not suggesting for one moment that we're going to flood the European market or flood the UK market with beef, but as somebody who visits the UK regularly, the price of red meat in the UK is extortionate.
Right.
It's not that good. So let's get some great Aussie beef over there and great Aussie lamb over there to eat.
And we don't like each other during the Ashes series, but there's an undeniable link. It's a no-brainer that we should be close in this area.
Absolutely. Look, when you look at the foundations of Australia, in modern Australia, when you think about our education system, you think about our legal system, you think about our policing and our military, and pick any form of, any walk of life, all of our institutions here in Australia are based, our parliamentary system, it's all based on the UK model. And because of that, it means that the structures that we need to negotiate between, be that the FCA and APRA or ASIC, looking at the Bank of England, looking at the way the Reserve Bank of Australia operates. All of those institutions are very, very similar in structure. So the ability to say, hey, let's just make it easier for us to do things, those regulatory platforms are very similar. So if we can see a little bit of regulatory tightening and changing around things, just enough to make it easier to do the same business we do here and do it in the UK and vice versa, that'll give us great opportunities to do more.
Now, we can see on the screen there the British pound expected to drop. What are your thoughts there?
It's the beautiful thing about the UK still maintaining its own currency. Would have been a very different scenario for the UK if they'd gone into the euro back in the 90s. So a floating currency, the whole purpose of having a floating currency is it's able to help minimise the impact on the economy internally within a country by the pound dropping, if that's what happens. But I think you'll actually see the pound rally in the next few days. I think there's a level of uncertainty that will happen during the first period, the normal shock to the system. But I think you'll see it rally after that.
Now, getting out of Australia for a moment, they've probably got about 11 months to work out a new trade deal with the EU as well.
That's right. Yeah, so the transition period's scheduled to end at the end of this year. Boris Johnson's been very clear that he will, indeed he's putting it into the legislation that there is no wriggle room on that deadline. I think it gives him a really strong negotiating hand with the EU to say, well, here's the timeline, we've got to get a good deal done. Don't prevaricate. Let's get on with it. And that's clearly been his message since he became Prime Minister. It's been his clear message in his negotiation with the EU to get the withdrawal agreement done. I see that going forward as being a really strong hand for him. And already I think there's some conciliatory tones from the EU who have been really strong in their negotiating position up till now. But since the general election and in the last couple of weeks, as the votes have gone through, there's been, I think, a much stronger sense. Even Macron saying, we still want to have a great, strong relationship with the UK. So, the French even are recognising that, and they're always one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, they've not always been close. Look, there's been parties, there's been protests, and that's the way we've been reporting this morning, of course, on this historic day. But there's still issues, there's still things to handle. Scotland, Northern Ireland. Absolutely. I mean, as I say, we're sort of somewhat at the beginning of the end, hopefully, but certainly at the end of the beginning. The challenge now is how does Boris Johnson and how do the UK come together again? Because for the last few years it's clearly been very fractious. You've had people outside Parliament yelling non-stop day and night, no Brexit. I'm sure you've seen it many times on the footage here. And equally you've had plenty of Brexiteers campaigning out the front as well, saying, you've got to get on with it. So it is a difficult challenge to bring that together. Certainly Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Nationalist Party, who have always been, they're about an independent Scotland. That's fundamentally their proposition as a political party. They're going to make it difficult. They're going to want to sort of make a case for a second referendum in Scotland. They're going to want to make a case to potentially leave. I think that'll be an interesting piece to see how that plays out. I think it really depends on how well Boris Johnson and his team negotiate with the EU as to how close those ties are. And then it will be, if the ties are very close, which I suspect they will be, when you're given the global context of globalisation at the moment, you look at Australia, we're trying to sign free trade agreements with as many countries as we can. And everybody else in the world, the TPP-11, apart from Donald Trump, almost everybody else in the world is sort of putting down their protectionist barriers, looking for more trade, understanding the value of that trade in terms of lifting people out of poverty globally and those sorts of outcomes. And knowing that, it seems hard to believe that between the EU and the UK going forward, they're going to actually look to put barriers in that are going to be substantive. Well, it's been a long time coming. It's a historic day. It's going to be an interesting 12 months, and I look forward to speaking to you regularly over the next few months about how things unfold. Good on you, David.